Death Valley National Park stretches across a vast expanse of salt flats, mountains, and deeply carved canyons. You'd think since it's a national park, it wouldn't be considered dangerous. Yet, its name says otherwise. Death Valley actually got its name from a group of pioneers who became trapped there in the winter of 1849 while looking for a shortcut. Much like the pioneers, there are others who have also had their fair share of unfortunate travels in Death Valley. In early April of 2021, Alexander Lofgren and Emily Henkel entered that landscape with intention and experience. They were not casual tourists unfamiliar with the risks of wilderness travel. Both had spent time in remote environments and understood the basics of preparation. They had a capable vehicle, camping equipment, navigation tools, and a plan. They were expected to return by a specific date. To them, this was not reckless. It was a deliberate step into a place they respected. They drove into a remote section of the park along Gold Valley Road, an unpaved route that cuts through isolated terrain. Roads like this are not maintained to the standards of highways. They are tough, uneven, and often covered in loose rock. Tires can fail easily in these conditions, especially after prolonged stress. At some point along that road, their vehicle suffered critical tire damage. When it was later found, both tires were flat. The vehicle could no longer move. Being stranded in a remote desert is not immediately fatal, but it forces a decision. The vehicle provides shelter, shade, and a visible target for rescuers. It is often the safest place to remain. But that assumption depends on the likelihood of someone coming by. In a heavily trafficked area, staying put increases the chances of being found quickly. In a place like this, miles from regular travel routes, that calculation becomes uncertain. Inside the vehicle, they left behind a handwritten note. It was brief and direct. It explained their situation and their plan. They had experienced two flat tires and intended to hike toward Mormon Point. They believed they had enough water for 3 days. The note reflects a decision made with logic. Rather than attempt to backtrack a longer distance over rough terrain, they chose a shorter route that appeared more efficient. On a map, the route made sense. In reality, it required crossing through a canyon system that is far more difficult than it appears from above. They left the vehicle and began hiking. At first, the terrain would have seemed manageable. The open desert gives the impression of space and mobility. But as they moved forward, the land began to change. The ground became uneven. The route narrowed. The open expanse transitioned into a canyon system shaped by ancient water flow. These canyons are not simple pathways. They are steep, confined, and filled with loose rock and sudden drops. Movement through them requires careful footing and constant attention. They entered the canyon near the Willow Creek area. It was here that the situation began to unravel. At some point during their descent through the canyon, Alexander Lofgren fell. In terrain like this, a fall does not need to be dramatic to be fatal. A single misstep on unstable rock can lead to a loss of balance. The slope can carry a person downward with little chance to stop. The injuries that result from such a fall can be severe and immediate. In this case, the fall resulted in fatal trauma. There was no opportunity for rescue, no immediate aid. The isolation of the canyon meant that what happened there unfolded without interruption. Emily Henkel was left alone. The shift from a shared situation to complete isolation is significant. It changes not only the physical challenge, but the psychological one. The person she had been traveling with, planning with, and relying on was suddenly gone. The environment around her did not change, but her position within it did. At some point after his fall, she also fell. The terrain that caused the first accident remained just as dangerous. Her fall resulted in a severe injury to her leg and ankle. The injury was serious enough that she could no longer walk out of the canyon. Movement became extremely limited, if not impossible. She was now stranded in a location that was both remote and difficult to access, even for trained rescuers. The desert environment added another layer of danger. In April, Death Valley is not at its peak summer temperatures, but conditions are still harsh. Daytime heat increases the rate of dehydration, especially after physical exertion. At the same time, nights can become cold enough to create a risk of hypothermia, particularly for someone who is injured and unable to move effectively. Water became the most critical factor. The human body can survive only a limited time without it, and the desert accelerates water loss. With only a finite supply, every decision becomes tied to conservation. Movement uses energy and water. Remaining still conserves both, but does not solve the problem of rescue. She remained in the canyon for days. Time in that kind of situation does not pass in a normal way. Without movement or change, each hour stretches. The focus shifts to immediate needs: finding shade, preserving energy, enduring heat during the day, and cold during the night. The body weakens as dehydration progresses. The mind is forced to contend not only with survival, but with isolation and loss. At some point during this period, she wrote messages, including a plea expressing her determination to survive and her hope that rescue would come. These writings reflect a state of mind focused on endurance. Survival in such conditions is not just physical, it requires maintaining enough clarity and resolve to continue. Meanwhile, outside the canyon, concern had already begun to grow. When Lofgren and Henkel did not return as expected, people close to them took notice. Their absence triggered a response that would become critical. Search efforts began, initially focused on known plans and possible locations. Death Valley is vast, and without a clear starting point, searches can take time to narrow down. The discovery of their vehicle became the turning point. When search teams found it along Gold Valley Road, the note inside provided direction. It told them what had happened and where the couple intended to go. This shifted the search from a broad effort across a massive landscape to a more focused operation within a specific region. Aerial searches began scanning the canyon systems near the indicated route. After several days, they were located. From above, rescuers identified both individuals on a steep ledge within a remote canyon. The terrain was so difficult that reaching them was not immediate. Initial attempts to access the location were unsuccessful due to the steep and unstable conditions. A ground team was deployed to approach the area on foot. Moving through that kind of terrain requires time and precision. The same conditions that had led to the initial accident now slowed the rescue. When rescuers finally reached them, Alexander Lofgren had already died from his injuries. Emily Henkel was still alive. She has survived approximately 6 days in the canyon with a severe injury and limited resources. She was evacuated from the area and transported for medical care. Her injuries required treatment, but she had endured long enough for the search effort to reach her. Survival in that situation cannot be reduced to a single factor. It involved conserving energy, managing limited resources, and remaining in a location where she could eventually be found. It also depended on the fact that others knew where to begin looking and that a note left behind provided critical information. In the aftermath, more became known about Alexander Lofgren. He was a U.S. Army veteran who had served in Afghanistan and later worked helping other veterans access services and support. His connection to the outdoors was part of his life, not separate from it. Emily Henkel later described the experience as something that reshaped her understanding of everything. The loss she experienced in the canyon was immediate and complete. At the same time, her survival placed her in a position to carry that experience forward. The sequence of events that led to this outcome is made up of decisions that, at the time, were reasonable. A vehicle becomes disabled. A shorter route appears viable. A canyon is entered. A step is misjudged. Each moment follows logically from the one before it. The outcome is not the result of a single reckless act, but of a chain of circumstances in an environment that does not allow for much error. Death Valley remains unchanged. The same roads continue across the same terrain. The same canyon walls stand where they always have. There is no visible marker that tells this story to those who pass through the area. And yet, there are stories that continue, like the pioneers and Emily.